my name is Grace, and it's my absolute pleasure and privilege to be here talking to you guys today, albeit in this virtual forum. Just before I begin, I want to give you a little bit more background about myself. So Emmeline's done a really great job, so thanks. I don't really think I need to say too much more, but just so you're not listening to a stranger. As Emmeline said, my background is a nurse, and I currently work as the National Coordinator for the Power to Protect program, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. Other than a few years in the adult emergency department, mainly to get some good work stories, I've worked in and around Starship Hospital. And I also work with the Adult Sexual Assault Service. So today I am here to talk to you about shaken baby syndrome, also known as abusive head trauma. Just also a little disclaimer before I start. As Emmeline mentioned, some of the things we will be talking about today can be quite distressing, and I just want to recognise that some of you might have had personal experience with this issue, either in your professional life or in your communities. So I just want to acknowledge that up front, and I just want to encourage any of you that find this maybe triggering in some way, then please do feel free to contact me or Emmeline, I'm sure, through Safekids. We'd be very, very happy to talk to you. So I just want to acknowledge that out front. I also want to acknowledge that there's a really wide range of people, I imagine, listening to me right now. And so I want to acknowledge that a lot of you probably do have quite a lot of knowledge in this area already. And I imagine a lot of you are really heavily involved in this work. So I just want to say thank you very much for that. Thank you for caring, thank you for being here, and thank you for listening. I'm going to do quite a broad overview today, but as Emmeline said, do feel free to pop any questions in the chat box on Facebook or on Zoom, and I will do my best to answer them at the end. So I just thought I would start with the 6 key messages. So if you're not able to listen for the whole hour, this is essentially the key of the point of the whole talk. So I'm just going to quickly run through these. Feel free to screenshot the messages or take a photo, but this is the crux of what we're going to get at. Number 1, it's normal for babies to cry, and it's normal to get frustrated. Number 2, if you are getting frustrated, it's okay to walk away. Put baby in a safe place, and obviously that's an important part, and take a break. It doesn't mean you're a bad caregiver. In fact, we really, really encourage that. Number 3, never ever shake a baby. So a moment where you lose control might change your life and your baby's life forever. Number 4, never leave baby alone with anyone who may lose control. Number 5, share this information with absolutely everyone who's looking after a baby. And if you think your baby or a baby has been injured, then seek medical help at once. So I'll go through those more in some detail, but I just thought I'd start off with those 6 key messages. And I also just want to say, I really hope that this is a relevant talk to all of you, whether you have a baby of your own, whether you're working with whānau who have babies, but I really think that these messages are relevant for absolutely everyone. So what is abusive head trauma or shaken baby syndrome? So we use these terms interchangeably. So essentially, historically, it has been known as shaken baby syndrome. So I imagine more of you might be familiar with that term than abusive head trauma. However, we use the term abusive head trauma to encompass all tamariki under the age of 5. Therefore, the term baby isn't necessarily accurate. The term abusive head trauma also encompasses a whole range of injuries, those not just caused by shaking, essentially any inflicted head injury. And I'm just going to talk quite openly. I hope that's okay. So injuries can also be caused by blunt force trauma or throwing a child, so not just by shaking. However, because this term shaken baby syndrome is more well known, we still use that for educational purposes. Furthermore, it's quite a lot less confrontational when it comes to education. So that's just a little bit of background about the terminology. It is the #1 cause of head injury in under 2 years old here in Aotearoa, and these babies don't do well. So unfortunately, about 1 in 5 or 20% of these babies will die. And those that don't are left with significant permanent injury, most commonly brain injury. As of last year, the most recent estimate for the financial cost of this issue is $11.7 million. So that's not just the initial cost caring for these children, but it's also the lifetime ongoing costs. It won't surprise you to learn, I imagine, that this program is actually funded by ACC through Ministry of Health. They've realised how expensive this is, and essentially, from a financial point of view, really motivated to prevent this from happening. I do want to really stress, though, although this has a really heavy financial burden, it doesn't begin to compare to the moral and social burden of this issue. So today we're going to be talking numbers and statistics, but I just want to remind you that each one of these tamariki we're talking about has a family around them and a community, and so the ripple effects of this are really, really huge. So how common is this? So here in Aotearoa, we're diagnosing about 20 to 25 cases per year. Unfortunately, last year was a particularly bad year for this. Some of you might have been aware of some of these cases that were highlighted in the media, but we think what we're only seeing is the tip of the iceberg. So as I say, we're diagnosing about 20 to 25, and although 20 to 25 is 20 to 25 more than we want to be seeing, and would still warrant a really serious response, we think that the actual incidence is probably a whole lot higher. There was a study done in North Carolina which estimated that the ratio of diagnosed to undiagnosed cases might be as high as 1 to 150. Given the rest of our rates here in New Zealand, we have no reason to think we would be any better. So if we're going on that same ratio, then we're looking at about 3,000 babies a year that are shaken. There was another study done in Holland, which estimated that about 5.6% of parents slap, shake, or smother their baby in the first 6 months of life. So again, we think, we don't know the exact numbers here in New Zealand, but we think that the numbers are a whole lot higher than what we're seeing. Even if a baby is symptomatic, then the symptoms are often quite general, things like lethargy, irritability, poor feeding, things that can point to a whole range of different problems. And so even if a baby is symptomatic, it is really, really hard to diagnose. I'm not going to go into the diagnosis in today's webinar. We're just going to focus on prevention. But I do want to highlight that it's really good. Any of you who are listening who are healthcare professionals, given how common we think this probably is, it's really good to keep this in the back of your mind as a differential diagnosis. So risk factors that predispose a child to this. The most common age for this to happen is around the 5-month mark. The main risk factor essentially is that babies are small, so babies can be picked up, babies are light. And I won't go too much into a baby's anatomy, but essentially babies have a really large head to body ratio, weak floppy neck muscles, and also the brain tissue is a much higher consistency of water, which means that the injury is worse. So essentially that's the first risk factor, the baby's anatomy. There have also been some other risk factors identified in the New Zealand literature, and these are risk factors that probably won't surprise you. They're risk factors that add to a stress in a family's life. So young mothers, particularly mothers under the age of 20, late booking for antenatal care, a history of postnatal depression, maybe some others that might be a little bit less intuitive, but multiple births. So if a mother has babies in quick succession, and also a lower gestational age at delivery. So essentially, if the baby's born early, they're at a higher risk. We don't exactly know why this is, but again, we think it probably just adds to the stress in a whānau. So although there are risk factors, the main thing I want to emphasize about this point is that shaken baby syndrome can happen to absolutely anyone regardless of demographic, regardless of socioeconomic status or ethnicity. There hasn't been a culture or anywhere in the world that doesn't have this as a documented issue. In fact, in I think 1/3 of cases that we diagnose here in New Zealand, there's absolutely no known risk factors. So this is a problem that affects absolutely everyone. And if you are in the privileged position to be giving education to communities or whānau about looking after tamariki, then I really want to encourage you to not just be giving this to those who you think have risk factors, but to be giving this information to absolutely everyone. And I think I just want to highlight here as well, just the role that bias plays in that. So both our conscious and unconscious bias. So just encourage us all to be aware of those biases. And as I say, this affects absolutely everyone. So when I first started this role a couple of years ago, I was really surprised at how common this is, or in fact that this even happened at all. I thought, surely people know shaking babies is bad. Surely we're wired to protect our children. And I still think that. I think we are hardwired to protect babies. But the one hypothesis is that there's a momentary loss of control. So this isn't a planned thing. This is generally a momentary loss when someone just loses the plot. So the main antecedent for this sort of injury is a baby's crying. As you all know, babies cry to communicate. I'm sure all of you have heard a baby's cry before. So babies cry when they're hungry or thirsty or hot or cold or overstimulated. Babies cry. As adults, we associate crying with emotion. With babies, that's not the case. They cry because that's their only way to communicate. I just thought I would play you all a quick clip to remind you of what a baby's cry sounds like. Some of you might have heard it at 10 minutes ago or 3 o'clock this morning, and for some of you it might have been a wee while earlier. Cool. So I thought I'd only play 10 seconds of that. But just to remind you that we are wired to respond to a baby's crying. And a baby's crying can be extremely frustrating, particularly on the background of sleepless nights, a lack of family support, just an overwhelming rush of hormones and emotions. So babies crying can be hugely frustrating. It's here that I like to do just a little disclaimer. I'm not yet a mother other than to a kitten who Emmeline has seen, I think, more than one occasion. And this cat, he sleeps in between my husband and I, and he can be really annoying in the middle of the night and wake us up because he wants to go out. But I know that that doesn't even begin to compare to being woken up periodically by a screaming, crying baby. So I just want to honor all of you who are listening to me right now, whether you're a mum or a dad or an auntie or an uncle or a grandparent or anybody at all who's looked after a baby. It's really tough, so I just want to honor you. The program that we run, the Power to Protect program, really focuses on crying, how to cope with a crying baby, and how to know what is normal when it comes to crying. So you'll see here on the screen, there's a bell curve of normal infant crying. So you can see that it increases after the 2-week mark. It tends to peak around 2 months and then slowly dip down again. You'll also see on this bell curve that some babies cry up to 6 hours a day. In my sort of travels around the country, I was in Taranaki a few months ago, and then there was a really experienced midwife, I think with 6 tamariki of her own, and her number 6 cried for 12 hours a day. So some babies cry a lot. Here is one tool that has been developed to try and educate people around what is normal for crying. It's called the period of purple crying. And if this is something that you think, oh, that looks interesting, then there's a whole lot of resource around this specific tool. If you Google period of purple crying, there's heaps and heaps of resource. So it's an acronym, and I'm just going to quickly run through it. But P, peak of crying. As you saw in that bell curve, crying increases after the 2-week mark. So if you are talking to a first-time caregiver with a 2-week-old baby who comes to you and says, my baby is so good, they hardly cry, it might be a really kind thing to do to warn them that actually crying probably increases after that 2 weeks. Unexpected, so babies cry and you just don't know why, can come and go at any time. Resist soothing, so you can be the best caregiver in the whole world. Baby can be fed and changed and clean, and baby is still crying. Pain-like face, a baby might look like they're in pain even if they're not. And I just want to mention here that generally those who look after the baby the most obviously know the baby the most, and they will be able to generally tell if something's wrong or if it's just a normal crying. How long lasting, so crying can go on, as I said, for hours and hours and hours and hours, and evening, so babies cry more in the late afternoon and evening. So again, feel free to screenshot this or to Google period approval crying if that is something that you think might be helpful. I think as well for a lot of us, I speak as someone who's not a mother, I think maybe we have unrealistic expectations of what it's going to be like to have a baby. We're exposed on social media to pictures of happy families and happy smiling babies, but when a baby does come along, the reality of that actually can look quite different. So I think it's really important to be talking about crying and normalize that. So I'm in a really privileged position to be dealing with the upstream end of this issue. So trying to prevent shaken baby syndrome or abusive head trauma from happening at all. So here in Aotearoa, the program we have developed is called the Power to Protect program. So I'm just doing a little bit of promo for that program. We have some pamphlets, and I imagine, or at least I hope some of you might have seen these pamphlets before. So this has just got some information about the program, and it also has, sorry, I don't think you'll be able to see that very well, but it has a crying checklist on there. So if you are looking after a crying baby, sometimes it's really useful to have a checklist you can go through to see if you can work out why baby's crying and what you can do to soothe baby. You can order those pamphlets for free online, and there'll be, I'll have a link to that at the end of this presentation. We're also in the process of hopefully developing some more resources. Hopefully there'll be some more resources coming your way soon. We also have a 10-minute video, which I'm going to play for you now. So as I said, we can talk numbers and statistics and programs, but actually when it comes down to it, this really affects individuals and communities and whānau. So this video interviews whānau who've had personal experience and people who've had personal experience with this issue. And I just really want to honour them and their bravery for sharing their stories. So we're going to watch that video now. Again, just a little warning, it is quite an emotive video. So we're going to watch that now.
Every year, innocent children are admitted to New Zealand hospitals with shaken baby syndrome. And it's just the normal sound of the baby crying which can be the life-threatening trigger.
It was that moment of picking him up and just in sheer frustration. Shut up. He couldn't get him to be quiet.
One momentary lapse in judgment and a baby's life could be changed forever.
When a baby's brain is shaken, the tissues move and tear more easily than they would in an adult.
1 in 5 will die.
They called it and decided to turn off her life support. I remember pleading, begging, please, please, there must be something that you can do. There has to be.
A newborn baby is tiny and helpless, totally reliant on its parents or guardians for care and love. Life's journey may see a few bumps and bruises, but not in babies, as they are at their most vulnerable.
The head is much bigger proportionately compared to the rest of the body. The neck muscles are much weaker. The structure of the brain itself is different. So a baby's head is much more susceptible to this kind of injury than an older child or an adult.
So any violent shaking can cause serious head injuries or even death, a condition known as shaken baby syndrome. As parents, a crying baby can tip us over the edge. When your baby cries, they're trying to communicate with you and the world. However, if their crying is tipping you over the edge, remember it's okay to put the baby down in a safe place, walk away, and take a short break.
I think the common scenario is probably that you have a crying baby and an adult that can't cope with that crying. They're stressed, they're tired, they're angry about something. It may be the middle of the night, they don't know how to cope, and they snap and they shake that baby.
So how does shaking a baby cause so much damage? Hard shaking causes the baby's head to whip back and forth uncontrollably.
The brain moves inside the skull, that stretches the vein, that tears the veins, and it also tears the substance of the brain itself, and also can tear the layers inside the eye. And often babies will stop breathing as well, and when they stop breathing, that cuts off oxygen supply to the brain, that makes the brain swell further. 1 in 5 of these babies will die, and of those that survive, the vast majority will have some form of permanent severe brain injury.
9-year-old Ryan is one of those children who suffers from a number of injuries after being shaken as a 5.5-month-old baby. These include epilepsy, blindness, and behavioural problems. He's now looked after by his grandmother, Julie.
Ryan was shaken by his mother's boyfriend, who was supposed to be looking after him until it was time to take him to his caregiver.
Ryan's case is typical of the children we see with shaken baby syndrome, who has serious permanent injury that is going to require someone helping to care for him for the rest of his life. He ended up being cared for by a loving grandparent who, because of her devotion to him, will make a huge difference to his life.
To see a child, any child that's been hurt and in hospital is heartbreaking. You just can't explain how you feel. It's a huge jolt. You don't expect it to happen to you.
But never expected he would become a permanent caregiver to his granddaughter Caitlin just a few months after she was born.
Caitlin was the precious little jewel of my life. Caitlin was the be-all and end-all of everything to me when she first arrived.
However, Caitlin's life hung in the balance after she was shaken by her parents as a very young baby.
I give her my heart. I just loved her to bits.
Bevan and Kay have put retirement on hold to look after their disabled granddaughter.
She has responded to every little bit of what Kay and I have given her, and she's now a 6-year-old developing into a lovely young lady.
This kind of injury is seen in all cultures and in all races and in all ethnic groups all across the world.
However, sometimes your child or baby's life is entrusted to a caregiver, a grandparent or a babysitter. Is it someone you trust? Kahurangi has 2 young boys and knows what it's like to feel stress and anguish as a busy parent. In 2003, her world fell apart when her daughter Anahera was rushed to a Wellington hospital and Kahurangi had no idea why.
In Anahera's case, she had a blow or impact to the head, and that's very common in shaken babies. Many babies are not just shaken. There's often impact as well, but in both cases, they suffer serious harm.
With her daughter's life hanging by a thread, Kahurangi learned the awful truth behind Anahera's injuries and felt compelled to tell a hospital nurse.
I said to her, I've got something to tell you. And I said, my partner has just admitted to having my daughter.
Medical staff realised there was no way Anahera would recover from her injuries, so a decision was made to switch off her life support.
And I remember pleading, begging, please, there must be something that you can do. There has to be. And he said, I'm sorry, there's nothing that we can do. And I said, well, this can't be it. And he was like, yes, this is it.
Anahera's stepfather was charged with manslaughter and jailed.
If I knew what I knew now, back then, it would be very different. And it's easy for people to go, but there must have been some sign, you must have known, this stuff doesn't happen in isolation. Well, actually, whether there were signs or not, it actually didn't stop the fact that she's not around anymore.
Taking care of a baby is a full-time job. New parents are suddenly thrown into a life of sleep deprivation and stress. A crying baby can tip many of us over the edge. But there are a few simple ways to deal with a crying baby. Try and stay calm. Hold the baby close. You could even try massaging their back. Try feeding baby. Singing, humming, or talking may help. Maybe even try some playtime. Put the baby in a stroller and go for a walk. You could try putting them in their car seat and taking a drive. But if you feel yourself losing control, put the baby in a safe place and walk away.
If your children make you mad, get out of there. Get out of there real quick. And actually find somebody that you can share your reality with.
So try calling a relative, a friend, or even a trusted neighbour to take a break. Remember, it's okay to know when you've reached your limit.
Remove yourself, be strong enough, because that's not failing. Don't think that you have to be able to do this, you have to be able to fix this. If you've tried everything and baby's still crying, then remove yourself. Like my son wasn't thinking, it was that one, shut up. And that caused all this damage.
Sharon's grandson, Brodie, was just a month old when he was shaken by his father.
He'd been tried giving him a feed, he'd walked him, he'd put him on his bouncer. It was a lot of stress, with a first child, young parents, it's all new.
And all it took was one violent shake to put newborn Brodie in Starship Hospital with serious injuries.
And my son was honest. He told me straight up what had happened. It wasn't intentional, but the impact of that one mistake has cost us as a family and Brodie. And my son went to jail. He did 3 years. He's had to live with the fact that even though he did not mean to hurt his baby, it has.
Well, parents and caregivers go through enormous anguish. It's not just the anguish of coping with the loss of their child or the loss of their child's future. It's the anguish of coping with the shame and the denial. It's a devastating process for families as well as for the children involved.
Shaken baby syndrome is preventable. Everyone feels stress. However, it's not okay to take it out on the baby. Just walk away, come back, and comfort baby when you've calmed down. Before you feel yourself losing control, make sure you have a plan in place on who to call for help. And if anyone is looking after your baby, give them your contact details in case they're unable to cope. For more information, contact your health provider.
So that video is available on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and type in Power to Protect or Shaken Baby Syndrome, it should be the first one that comes up. We also do have DVDs available. Yeah, so if you do have a DVD player, then it is available on DVD as well. So we're just going to run through those 6 key messages of the program. And this has been, the simple messaging has been shown to reduce the incidence of abusive head trauma overseas. And so we've adapted it to a New Zealand context. And we're hopeful that this is a helpful messaging. So number 1, as I said, it's normal for babies to cry, but it's also normal to get frustrated. So just trying to remove that guilt that people feel. If you are frustrated, it's okay and it's normal. It doesn't mean you don't love your child. It doesn't mean that you're not a fantastic caregiver, but it's we are wired to respond to that crying. Number 2, it's okay to walk away. So if you are feeling frustrated and you've done everything you can do, you've taken baby for a walk, you've fed baby, and you're still feeling absolutely frustrated and baby's crying, it's okay to put baby down and take a break. And again, trying to remove any guilt that people might feel about that. It is important that baby is in a safe place, safe sleeping position, and we're not advocating for putting a crying baby in a room for hours on end, but what we are advocating for is taking a break. Ideally have a plan in place for what you do beforehand. So call a trusted friend. You might want to have a cup of tea, listen to music, do what you need to do to calm yourself down. Number 3, never ever shake a baby. So a moment where someone loses control might change baby's life and their life forever. Never leave baby alone with anyone who you think may lose control. So unfortunately, last year we saw quite a few cases where a baby had been left alone with someone for just a few minutes. So it's really important that we're aware of who is looking after a baby. Share this information with everyone who's looking after a baby. So oftentimes, particularly mums and dads, get given so much information, particularly just before baby's born and after baby's born. But it's really important that this isn't just given to the mums, but it's also given to mums and dads and aunties and uncles and friends and neighbours and absolutely everyone who's looking after the baby. And number 6, if you think baby has been injured, then seek medical help at once. So those really are the 6 key messages and the 6 take-homes that I would love all of you to leave here with. I think they'll probably be sent out in the email, the follow-up email from Safekids, and they're also online. So if you want more information, as I say, you can watch the Power to Protect video, the one we just watched on YouTube. You can also get these pamphlets, and there's also some posters available at healtheds.govt.nz. Unfortunately, we only have the printed pamphlets currently in English, but we do have a PDF in Māori, and we're hoping to extend that into different languages. But that's just free on the Health Ed website. If you're wanting if you're listening in a professional capacity or not, you're welcome to do this. We've got an online e-learning. So if you go to that website, learnonline.health.nz, then that will take you to an e-learning to learn more about this. I've also got my contact details up there. So if any of you would like to contact me, want any more information, if any of you work somewhere that you think that this would be really useful information, then I'm very happy to come and give a similar presentation, or I'm very happy to share all the resource I have with you to give a similar presentation. Anything I can do to support you in disseminating this information. So do feel free to send me an email. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. Thank you for caring. Thank you for what you do for already looking after our tamariki.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you so much, Grace, for sharing your mātauranga in this space. We do have a couple of questions that I'd like to start off with. Firstly, someone answered, I think Grace answered it just before, that these presentation slides will be made available. So the email that you registered with, we'll send that out to you after this. I do have another question. So the question is, how long should a baby be left to cry? What if they're unwell?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as I said, we're not advocating to leave a baby crying for a really long time, but I guess the length of time is dependent on how frustrated the caregiver is. So I'd say don't pick up a baby if you're feeling frustrated. A baby, crying doesn't harm the baby, so I'm probably not going to advocate for a specific length of time. Obviously, you don't want to leave a baby crying for hours on end. But you know, if you take 10 minutes out while baby's crying to have a cup of tea and phone a friend, then I think that's absolutely okay. And how do you know baby's unwell? That's a really hard question. When I worked in the Children's Emergency Department, babies come in all the time, and it's really, really hard to know if a baby's unwell because they obviously can't tell you their symptoms. But what I would say is refer back to the mum or the dad. Mums often really know their babies, and if they're worried, then I'd say listen to that intuition and that gut. And I'd say with babies, if you are concerned, have a low threshold for bringing them into hospital, and no one will or should ever tell you off for being concerned and bringing your baby in for a checkup. I hope that answered the question okay.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a question here from Gabrielle. Hope I've said that right. She's a great presentation. Many of my clients, about 45%, are Mandarin. Would love a pamphlet resource in Mandarin, and I guess it just kind of highlights the need for resources for all out there who English isn't their first language. And
Absolutely.
Kind of,
yeah. I apologize. I don't have anything in Mandarin to offer you right now, but I really hope in the future we're currently going through looking at program resource development. And so I'd really love to have a range of resource in different languages. I don't know off the top of my head if there's a similar program anywhere else with Mandarin speaking resources in China, but I can look into that for you. Yes.
Cool, thank you. And a question here from Julia. Is there a frustration scale, and would it be good to use with parents? Maybe it's kind of a question leading to that bell curve slide that you had about the peaks of crying in terms of baby's age.
Yeah, a frustration scale. I've never seen a frustration scale, to be honest, but I think that could be a really great idea. I think frustration is probably quite a hard thing to measure, and I think, to be honest, frustration probably exponentially increases quite quickly. So I've never seen a frustration scale, but yeah, that is a good yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have anything to add to that either, but yeah, I think a frustration scale would be a great idea.
That's nothing. Got a question here from Marama. She's really keen on knowing when a launch date for that new e-learning platform might be available. I know we're looking forward to it too.
Me too, Marama. I mean, I don't want to bore you all with back-end details, but we're just applying for funding at the moment, so really trying to get some funding. I would love to do some e-learning with Hapai Tahora, who have been really, really supportive, and I think they did a webinar, so they're absolutely excellent, and they have a great e-learning. Do a little promo for them as well on Suri, and so we're really hoping to get an e-learning with them as well. I really hope sooner rather than later. Yeah.
Well, I've got some more probably questions around kind of the effects of kind of post-event. Are there different levels of severity for shaking a baby, or is it just any jolt can cause harm?
That's a good question. I apologize, I should have said that earlier, but for obvious reasons we haven't been able to do studies to know exactly what level of shaking causes what level of injury. But what we're talking about here is intentional significant force. So this isn't an injury that can happen by accident. So if you're sort of soothing a baby, sort of, as you do, jiggling up and down, that's not the sort of force we're talking about. We're talking about significant intentional injury. Oftentimes the injuries that we're seeing mimic the injuries that we see in babies who have been in a car crash. So if you imagine if they're jolted forward and back, so really significant intentional force. So I don't want anyone to be anxious that they can cause this sort of by accident. And it's really hard to correlate the specific injuries to the specific mechanisms as well. It's really hard to draw those lines. We don't know, but we think potentially any symptoms in the future, we don't know, but we think maybe potentially learning difficulties, potentially all sorts of things may be related to incidents of shaking earlier on, but we have no way of knowing exactly. Yeah, but as I say, this is a significant intentional force. This can't happen sort of by accident.
Cool, thank you. And just got a last couple of two actually. When I guess the situations that we've heard about have been kind of in the home, with putting baby down in a cot. But what if we're out in public and baby's just not stopping crying? What would you suggest for caregivers out and about when this is happening?
That's a great question. I guess it's case specific. Again, what I would say is, and it's probably easier to said than done, but if you can have a plan of what to do beforehand. So if you have a plan of someone to call, then at least maybe if you have someone on the phone that can sort of talk you through, if you have someone nearby that you can drive to, if you can go home, put baby down and have a break. I guess it's quite specific on your situation. But yeah, I do acknowledge that it would be particularly hard in a public space. And I really hope that people in public have grace for crying babies as well and are extra kind to the person looking after a crying baby. Yeah, what I'd say is try and have a plan beforehand. Obviously, the more support someone has, the better. Again, oftentimes that's easy to say and much harder in reality. But if you have a whole community around you that can support you, then that is the ideal situation for everyone involved.
And with the plan that you were just discussing, is there anything kind of crucial that you'd like to share or whānau should be made aware of?
I'm trying. Like, one thing that we sometimes suggest, and I don't have one on me, but you can write sort of a crying plan and have that printed and above maybe where baby sleeps or in the kitchen, or and so if baby is crying, you can sort of work through that plan. That can be quite a helpful strategy. I've talked to quite a few midwives who use this Power to Protect pamphlet and put that crying checklist up on a fridge. It just means that if someone's feeling beside themselves and frustrated, it's a bit hard to think straight, so you've got a concrete something to work through. Yeah, I guess the most important part of it is just to be really kind to yourself. If you're looking after a baby, don't beat yourself up for getting frustrated. Be really kind to yourself as well as your baby.
Thank you. I kind of want to throw a little spanner in the works. I think, considering we're in Tamaki Makaurau, we're in level 3 lockdown, so not really supposed to leave your bubble. What would be kind of the best suggestion around that? I know I've got some friends and stuff that are having babies and things like that, and wishing I was there to be able to kind of give baby cuddles and things like that. What would you kind of suggest in this age around COVID? Totally.
COVID does sort of change everything, doesn't it? What I would suggest is just do what you can, do your best. If you are alone in the bubble with a baby, then hopefully you have access to phone or internet, so you can get support, even if it's not physical support. One of the ladies in my office used to vacuum to drown out the sound of the baby crying. So, I mean, that's something you could maybe do if you've got headphones, because, if you're not able to physically distance yourself from a baby's crying, it can be really difficult. So I'd say just do whatever you can, given the circumstances. And I guess do reach out for support for this, but for anything really. It is a particularly challenging time, and there are people that can support you on the phone, and it's not as good as in person. I totally recognize that, but there are people out there who are willing to listen at the very least. I don't know. Do you have any other ideas, Emmeline? I think you're probably
I know I'm not a mum, but all my friends who have babies, and obviously at the moment I can't go visit them. So I just think reaching out as a friend or an auntie, being able to reach out to your friends to say, if you're going through something like this, if baby's non-stop crying, if your partner is essential worker and working throughout this time, it's just you at home, just give me a call. Give me a call. My number's always there. You've got access to Messenger, you've got access to phones, hopefully. So that would be my kind of thing, making sure that I, as a friend, am being supportive of my friends who are hapu and who have babies. So
that's an awesome suggestion. What can we do as a community to support those with newborns? Absolutely.
And a great suggestion here from a couple of our attendees. Thank you, Darwin and Marima. Blanket line, free. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week. That number is 0800 933 922.
Thank you for that.
Kia ora for your guys' suggestion. And obviously Healthline is out there as well, whānau. So that's also a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week free service for everybody in Aotearoa. Thank you, Grace. And thank you for joining us today. Ngā mihi nui kia koe e hoa, for not only your session today, but also your mahi and the mahi that you continue to do with Dr. Patrick Kelly.